Welcome, everyone. My name is Jeremy Smith, and I'm with GrantStation's online education team. I'll be your host for today's webinar, and that's Is Your Organization Grant Ready? And your presenter for today will be Alice Ruhnke. Let me tell you a little bit about her. She's the president of Education and Outreach here at GrantStation, and she joined the team after 20 years of working in or with the nonprofit community. In the trenches, she's raised over $45 million and worked with hundreds of organizations to help them increase their capacity to raise funds. Now, she's a former nonprofit program coordinator and director and founder of the Grant Advantage. Alice has a really deep understanding of the challenges that nonprofits face, and today she's going to help you answer that question if your organization is grant ready. Here she is, Alice Ruhnke.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Jeremy, and thank you all for being here today. I like that we have a big crowd to kind of go through some of this information. We're going to really focus on three different areas. First, looking at your organization kind of at that level and seeing if you are grant ready at that level. And then we're going to drill down a little bit more to the proposal or the program level. So the projects or programs or initiatives that you have, are we ready at that level to apply for grants? And then, because financial information is always so important to funders, we also have a section to really drill down on your financial information and look at it from that perspective. So we'll look at different areas, and as we go through, there's some common areas that nonprofits, tend to have different struggles with. So I have some suggestions where in those specific areas where again nonprofits usually or frequently have a weakness and how we can kind of overcome that weakness. And then at the end, we'll talk about just how to kind of increase your own capacity to write those competitive applications. And then, like Jeremy said, we'll do questions at the end, and just please put them in the Q&A box because I know it's hard to keep track of those. So we're going to start really at the basics, right? As to what is a grant and how we should be approaching grants. And so I really like this definition from the Grantsmanship Institute, and where it's coming from different again angles or perspectives. So a funder is a nonprofit just like you, and they have a mission, and they usually have the funds to address that mission. And they might also have staff and expertise and training and all these other things, but they are taking their money, they're investing it in your organization to create some sort of positive change. Okay. And so you're their kind of feet on the ground, boots on the ground. And for us doing that work on the ground, grants are a tool that are part of our toolbox to address whatever our missions are. And we have other tools in our toolbox. We don't want every tool to be a grant because that is usually not very sustainable. We want kind of diversified funding sources. We want those donations. We want any earned income we can get. We have other tools that just come from our experience and our expertise in dealing with our target populations and dealing with the area that we deal with. So grants are just one part of your toolbox, okay? And then as you're looking at grants, you always want to look at them and approach funders and even donors in general, talking about the impact that their donation or their grant will have, not just talking about the money. So it's not like a transactional relationship. It's a relational relationship. That was kind of awkward. And so you're going to be building those relationships again with your donors, with your funders, and not making it just like an ATM transaction where you're going to them to get money every year and that's the only interaction that you have. So I really just kind of like that definition there and how it kind of really pulls together the whole kind of a lot of different views of grants and then how we want to approach writing them. So we're going to start by looking at if your legally prepared to receive grants. That's a really good basic place to start. And so that's getting your 501c3 status. The easy part of that, getting your 501c3 status, is actually the last bullet on the slide here, the state nonprofit incorporation status. That's usually the first step you'll take. You'll go to your Secretary of State's website, you will file to become a nonprofit organization, and that's a really fast process. Just like if you were starting a for-profit business, it really is remarkable at how little time it does take to get that started. But the part that's going to be more challenging is to get that tax exempt status from the IRS, getting that 501c3 status. And so there's a form, an IRS form, the 1023. And now there's the 1023 EZ if you don't anticipate that you're going to have really high revenues, early on, that you can fill out an easier version. But you will fill all that information out. With that, that will be submitted to the IRS. You will then get that status, hopefully. And you'll get your employer, your EIN number or your tax identification number, same kind of thing. And those will both come from the IRS. So those are kind of the steps that it takes to kind of get that status. And next, we're going to kind of look at some of the things that you either will be including in that application, or things that you will kind of be expected to have even if nobody asks for it. So it's like just some best practices to have some of these things, even though, you might not be submitting it with your 1023, or the state is not asking for this money or this information. So looking at those organizational documents, again, like I said, you'll get that nonprofit designation letter and that federal tax ID number. And so those will come once you are accepted. You will submit with those documents your bylaws. So you have to create your organization's bylaws. You'll have whatever your mission statement is will be identified in the development of your organization. You're going to list who your board of directors is, or your anticipated initial board. You will file your articles of incorporation. And so those will all go in that development part of establishing your 501c3 and your nonprofit organization. Some of these other things on the list are things that you will do to maintain that status, if you will. So you'll be filing a tax form every year, the 990 tax form, or if you, again, don't have a lot of money, there's an easy form, and even one that if you have really, really low receipts, that you just send in a postcard. But looking at those governance policies and procedures and operational policies and procedures, again, a lot of times these are not things that a funder asks you for, like, can I see your governing policies and procedures, or your financial policies and procedures, but they're going to expect that you have them and that your organization is guided by these policies and procedures. And so they are things that you want to develop from the beginning, and these can be updated every year. As a matter of fact, that's a good idea to look at them every year, but really starting that process with looking at how you're going to govern your organization and operate it. And so a couple of different, kind of, again, best practices of policies to have would be your financial policies, how you're going to manage the money. How does the money flow from the beginning of receipt all the way to the end of reporting? Looking at what your human resources policies are, and how much vacation time people are going to get, and how you're going to operate your organization, that way, with what kind of evaluation methods are you going to have for your staff, and different things like that. You're going to have policies around your board of directors and kind of what their roles and responsibilities are, how you're going to work with them. Then you're going to have like an organization and management policies and procedures, again, looking at how your organization operates on a day-to-day basis. And then having a fundraising policies and procedures is also really important. So, for example, what is your gift acceptance policy? So are you going to accept only cash and, let's say, stocks that somebody might donate to you? Or would you take goods? Would you take a house if somebody donated a house to you? Those kinds of things. So kind of setting up the fundraising the ways that you're going to bring in your dollars and the process for that. And then just the different laws and regulations that your organization is going to operate under. So all of these here, while it does look a little overwhelming, these do not have to be long, complicated things. I mean, again, especially as you're starting, you might find that you're putting together a process that as your organization just grows and becomes more complex, you kind of add, potentially different procedures to how you're doing things. So you don't have to start with, making them really, really complicated. You can start very simply. And then, like I said, you're going to want to just look at them every year with your board and make any changes to them as you move along. The other thing is you just don't have to start from scratch. There's a lot of places to go to look at how other people are doing it, get templates, get samples, just get ideas on how other people have put together their policies and procedures and how you then, as your organization, would like to do that. So the first place I would go look is your state nonprofit association. And so almost every state has a nonprofit association. The nice thing about your statewide nonprofit associations are that they usually will put into their best practices on policies and procedures whatever rules regulate your state. So there's different, how many people have to be on a board might vary from state to state. So if you're working with your nonprofit association, you're going to get the rules that you would have to abide by based on the state that you incorporated in. So I first suggest like working with them, seeing what they have, and how they can help you. The kind of the guiding agency above your state nonprofit association is the National Association of Nonprofits, the Council of Nonprofits. And so again, they have where you could find your state nonprofit association. They have information, a lot of best practices, again, a lot of samples, those kinds of things, and just tools that you can use. And so I really encourage you to look at those as well. And then just kind of looking more on the ground level, talking with maybe different funders or community foundations or your United Ways. They could maybe help you with developing those policies and procedures, or just people within your network, asking your peers, asking other organizations who do things like you do, what they do, how they do it. Can you see their policies and procedures? And then you can potentially just adapt them to meet your organization. So again, this doesn't have to be super, super hard, and you don't have to start from scratch to get these things done, but they're really going to help you as you are evolving and as you're growing as an organization, to always kind of have that to fall back on, and have it written down as to how you're operating. So I think a really important thing, and yet not something that most people kind of come back to unless there's a problem, right? But when there is a problem, say with human resources, you want to know how you're going to deal with that. So again, really good things to do up front. Besides the policies and procedures, funders are always going to want to make sure that you do have financial management systems in place. And so, again, if you're just starting, if you're getting started, this can also be a little bit challenging. I really encourage you to look at TechSoup, which is a nonprofit organization that offers discounted software and hardware to nonprofits. And you can join them for free, and then you get discounted software to like a QuickBooks or whatever kind of financial system that you're going to use. So look at them if you don't have that system set up. And then another thing that we did when I worked at the last nonprofit I worked at was we couldn't afford a full-time like CPA person to overlook everything we were doing. So what we would do is we got help in setting up our systems through a CPA, and they kind of set up our systems. We paid them for that initial kind of consultation. Then we just had our bookkeeper manage the books. Then, as we grew as an organization and went from getting like foundation grants and corporate grants to kind of going up the food chain to state and federal grants, we brought that CPA back in to, again, revamp our process, make sure we were following the federal guidelines, that sort of thing. And they kind of did a check for us. I believe it was every quarter or something like that. So it was a cost-effective way to do it. But having them, again, set up your system and then you can manage it from there is a cost-effective way to get those financial systems set up in the proper ways. Just a couple of things that as a grant reviewer, so this is just Alice Ruhnke talking here. But looking at the list of board of directors, I've done a lot of grant review, and when I'm doing that grant review and I see things where, and this is pretty common, I'll see the executive director and the board chair being the same person. So, somebody kind of founded this organization and they chose to be both roles, right? They were new, they came in, they had a passion, they're dealing with everything, and they took on both roles, which is not something that you want to do. You want a different chair of your board. Your executive director can be a de facto member of your board. They can be there for the meetings and setting them up and discussing things and all that sort of thing, but the executive director wouldn't be a voting person on your board or making those critical decisions because it's the board of directors that's directing your executive director. So it's a real conflict of interest whenever I see that executive director and that board chair being the same person. Which again, sometimes, like I said, when you're small and you're just trying to get things happening, it's kind of a common thing. And then the other thing that have seen a lot is where I'll see a list of board members and they're all family members. That's not inherently wrong, right? But it does give me some pause as to why, is this really an active board of directors, or are you just putting a list together of people who will sign off on things that you're doing, and it's not an actual board that's engaged and doing, leading the organization. So those two things, again, if you find yourself in those situations, something that you'll want to kind of think about and kind of correct up front. And then this was just the one about the website. It has nothing to do with anything except for usually if you don't have a website, I feel like you don't exist. But that's just like a personal feeling of mine. So kind of not having a website was always kind of a, okay, are you real sort of thing for me. Okay, so those are some of our, are we legal, if you will, as an organization? Most funders are giving only to 501c3 organizations. Some will give to 501c3 organizations and say any other organization that might be tax exempt. So that could be like a county commission. They don't have a 501c3, but they are tax exempt. Sometimes your school boards and things like that, they're not an official 501c3, but they are tax exempt. So that will vary from funder to funder. But if you have that 501c3, then that's usually the requirement for any sort of funding from foundations, government, all that sort of thing. Okay, so now we're going to look a little bit more at the program level. as to kind of how much information that you already have, how much planning have you done in these different areas, kind of how ready are you to start to apply for grant applications. So I'm going to talk about the components of this in the next few slides. So we'll kind of talk about these and how we can develop these, and what happens if we don't have them already. So the first thing that is really important is that your programs that your organization is offering, the initiatives, projects, whatever word it is that you use, are all stemming from your organization's mission and vision and values. That's the core. And you are then developing, initiatives that then address that mission, those vision, those values. And what you do see sometimes is nonprofits who start to, because finances get a little tough, they start to adapt and change who they are through the process in order to get a grant. So they didn't do this work originally, but they say, okay, I can do this work over here. And then, they see another funding opportunity and they go, I could do this work over here. They come back, in 2 years and look and they say that we're not even addressing the mission that we intended to. We were kind of chasing the funding streams. And I do get why kind of, we would have that tendency to do that because, money is scarce, but we want to really stay true to who we are, and avoid that mission creep. So that again, you're really addressing what it was that you set out to address. Okay. And as we're looking at those, programs, those mission, those vision, those values, as we find funders and we start to build those relationships with funders, or we start to write applications to those funders, making sure that you can really communicate the alignment between that foundation and what their mission is and what they're trying to support and what your organization is and what you're doing on the ground. So I have just a couple of just examples of two foundations, and GrantStation, what we do is we have the database of these funders that you can find that support your mission. So, you can see here in this profile from the Jacobson Foundation, that you can see here that their areas of interest are arts and culture and children and youth, social services. I won't read you the whole list. You can also see what types of support that they provide. So, you want to make sure that your programs are addressing, one of these factors, and that you are asking for types of support that this funder provides. So, that's just one example. A couple of other things that you can really look at on our profiles are the grants that funder awarded in the past. So that you can see ideas of other organizations that have been funded, how much they funded them, what they funded them for, those kinds of things. So you can get that feel for, okay, they have funded other organizations like mine at this level. You can look at their giving statistics to find their median giving, their annual giving, their average giving, all those kinds of things. And you can see both of those right on our profiles. And then you can go do additional kind of research to find out, looking at their annual reports and looking at their website. And again, really finding that common stream. So the first time that, again, you reach out or you write that application, you've already done your research on the funder and made that connection between you and them. So here's just a second example of the Mary Reynolds Babcock Foundation. And again, you can see that they have the target population that they support, and then they really, fund through 3 different pathways, right? So economic opportunity, they look at democracy and civic engagement, and then looking to support policies and institutions that work around community organizing. So again, finding that connection. This funder is very different from the previous funder, right? So you want to be able to communicate how this funder, this work that you're doing matches this one versus this work that you're doing matching another funder, and really making that connection. So that's kind of at the funder level, right? So we've made that connection. We know what the funder kind of likes to support, where they're coming from. We've connected with them. And now I want to talk a little bit about this slide here of different things that you can kind of have pre-ready, or things that are very, very commonly asked for in the majority of grant applications. And so, the little areas on the left are kind of usually the major sections of an application, where you have like your organizational background, um, you have the need for the project, what you anticipate will change from your outcomes, what you're going to do is your approach, how you're going to evaluate it is your evaluation, and then the funder usually asks for that project budget, which is just the budget for what you're asking for in this grant application. So these are also things that you can create ahead of time. And as you're looking at grants and looking at what's possible for you to apply to, you can have a lot of this planning already pre-planned. And then all you have to do is take this information that you've already pre-planned and then package it in the way that each funder likes to see it. And so that's a lot of what we teach at GrantStation is this planning framework that, by planning once, then you can take this information and send it to 10 different funders. And then the writing isn't quite as challenging because you're just taking, the same information and putting it in the funders format and using their instructions and all that sort of thing. Now, this doesn't mean that everything has to be done before you go looking for grants. These are things that you can put together. If you find, okay, there's a grant that's due in 60 days and I need to kind of, really explain and find the data on the need of my community and what my target population's dealing with and what I want to see changed, and again, how am I going to do it? You can put all this together. It's just the more of these things that you kind of have prepared, then as you're out there searching for grants, it just will be easier for you to take, things that you've already prepared and again, repackage it for different funders. So really, kind of important things to be dealing with, and, information that you can create. And like I said, we do a lot of webinars on how to do all of these parts. One of the parts, though, that's usually included in your approach section is your partnerships. And partnerships are really important to funders, and they take more time than, say, for example, writing a needs section. I can go find the data, I can look at my sources, I can put a compelling needs statement together, and I can do that in an afternoon. But I can't necessarily build a partnership in an afternoon or a week or 30 days, right? So these are things that if you haven't started to do, these would things that I would do to be more grant ready, right? Looking at other people in your community, looking at, who's doing the same kinds of things, and what makes you different or what makes you the same, right? That sometimes there's two organizations do the same thing in one community. Perhaps they're serving a different target population, but they're doing the same service. Or perhaps they're serving different neighborhoods in a county, and the services are the same. And starting to look at how you can kind of share resources with those organizations and partner together. Really looking at any agency that can help address basically the root cause of the problems that you're dealing with in your own mission. So if you're looking at things like, let's say employment, and you're trying to get, people gainfully employed is one of that's part of your mission. That you might partner with organizations who provide the transportation that people need to their jobs or to the training that maybe you're offering. And by partnering with them, you're supporting them because they're, kind of getting access to your target population, and they're furthering their mission and you're furthering your mission. And then you don't have to worry about the transportation piece. You don't have to develop a whole program about how to transport people, right? So kind of thinking really creatively about other groups that are addressing the same things you are and how you can collectively work together. And I have a couple of resources for you. So part of that is kind of, again, looking at that, doing kind of a root cause analysis and looking at who else is dealing with the problem. And then I also have this partnership identification tool that I'll send with the materials. And it's pretty simple. It's just what you're seeing here and on the next slide. But I broke it down into like businesses and corporations in one component, and then other like social service kind of aspects or community aspects on the next slide. But what I'm trying to do here is, as you are developing those partnerships, before you're even kind of reaching out to talk to people initially, is looking at, what are you offering to that organization? How are you going to be furthering their mission? Or in a business or corporation kind of situation, how are you going to advance their goals? Why would they want to partner with you? And so kind of identifying that up front, and then also looking at what resources you're going to be asking them for, or looking at, combining. So possibly those resources, in a business or corporation, you're looking for money from that organization, but those resources could be volunteers, those resources could be, advocates to be out there, marketing for you and doing some of your advertising. There's lots of different resources that we can ask for besides money. From these different groups. And again, it doesn't have to just be a money transaction, right? It could be that, again, you're supporting them through your staff work and they're supporting you through their staff work. And you're kind of sharing some of the resources of your human, just your human resources. So anyway, just with this list, I also kind of broke down businesses and corporations from, obviously we want those located in our community. Businesses like to give to their local communities. But sometimes if you're like me and you live in a really rural state, there's not a lot of businesses in our communities. So kind of expanding how we're looking at those businesses and corporations and looking to, where do your stakeholders work? So you have a group of volunteers, you have a board of directors, where do they work? And can you get connections to those companies through them? And then looking at other companies that sell to your stakeholders or sell to your clients, those sorts of things. And then different vendor corporations, so people that you purchase things from, they don't have to be in your local community to support your community or your organization. So again, just kind of looking broadly and doing some really fun brainstorming with no wrong answer with a whole group of people is really fun to come up with potentials here. And then the second part is just this whole list of community assets of, so many social service agencies in our communities, education institutions, from K through 12 to higher ed. Communities of faith are very important to, again, get resources from, get volunteers from, get dollars from, support those kinds of things. We have elected officials and government entities that can help. We have lots of different civic groups like our Rowatans and our Lions clubs and things that like to support us. Community gatekeepers, I think of those really critical people who in your community, when they say yes, they usually bring 5 people behind them saying yes, or 5 organizations behind them. They're like these leaders that once they get involved in a project, they bring people with them to support that project. Then you have healthcare, you've got media, you've got funders, and then you have all sorts of public resources when we think of our waterways and our beaches and our hiking trails and like parks and rec and all those sorts of things. So again, really looking broadly and starting to develop those partnerships and how you can help them and how they can help you. And like I said, this takes more time, so I wanted to spend some time on it because it's really, really important. Then there's different documents that you can pre-prepare that funders usually ask for. What they usually ask for are what they call attachments. And these are just things that you attach to your grant application. You write up your narrative and you tell your need and your approach and what you're going to change and your budget and all that stuff. But they ask for these attachments. And so these are things that, again, your 501c3 letter, your tax forms, if you have any audits, the list of board members, your organizational budget. So these are things that you can update, usually once a year because your tax form changes once a year. Your board members usually change once a year. Audits change once a year. Budget changes once a year. And you can have this, have somebody that's kind of assigned to update all this information. Then anytime you need it throughout the year, it's really simple to grab it from your shared drive or, it's on multiple computers, those kinds of things to kind of help ease the process when you're doing the different submissions for different funders. Okay, so now we're going to look at some of those a little bit of financial information. Again, these on the left, the organizational budget, I talked a little bit about when I talked at program level. The funder's usually going to want that program budget, that is what you're writing the grant for. But they'll also probably ask for an organizational budget. So that would be everything that your organization provides, overall. If you're a really small organization, those two things can be the same. But if you have multiple programs, then you'll have a different program budget versus organizational budget. I'm going to talk a little bit about matching funds and why it's so important to have those and how we can find them. And then we talked earlier about the financial, policies and procedures and wanting to have those already pre-prepared. These over here have more to do with if you are applying for federal grants. I'm going to kind of touch on that. I know that's probably not really high on people's to-do list right now, but I'll kind of point you in the right direction if you want to get started with some of those, ground level things that you want to get ready for if you want to apply for federal grants in the future. So another thing that I just kind of do want to talk about, though, we had, things like an audit, and not every nonprofit has an audit. And so what I would find is that, and especially a small nonprofit just isn't going to have an audit. And so I would find that if my clients, if I saw that an audit was required, I'd contact the funder and I would say, they don't have an audit. Is there a workaround process for that audit? And a funder would either say, yes, okay, in lieu of the audit, we want, the balance sheet, the profit and loss statement, whatever. And they would tell you what to submit in lieu of the audit. Then there are other funders who are going to say, nope, without an audit, you cannot apply. And so I would have clients who didn't have an audit who still wanted to apply. And so they would work with a fiscal sponsor. So this is also an idea for you of working with another organization that, has that 501c3 status, has, generally that audit. And they are the applicant for your grant. And you tend to run your programs, right? And so you build a formal agreement with them on how that's going to work, who's responsible for what. But that can be one workaround if you find that not having that audit is kicking you out of being eligible for funding. And you can work with a fiscal sponsor like on the ground. You might know of another organization that just does that locally. If you don't know of anybody, there is also just this national network of fiscal sponsors that you can look up, and these are like organizations that do this like as part of their services that they offer. There usually is a fee involved for being that fiscal sponsor. And you can also already be a 501c3 and be sponsored by a fiscal sponsor. So if you have your 501c3, but you don't have the audit, right, you can still partner with a fiscal sponsor and apply for that grant application. Next, I want to talk a little bit about matching funds. Usually what you will find is that most funders do not want to be the only dollar into a project. That funders don't like to see that you need $25,000 and you're asking them for $25,000. Showing them that you have support for your project coming from other places is really important so that they see that there's other resources that have been, allocated to this project. And you can find that match through either real money, real dollars, or through in-kind support. And so just talking through those a little bit, the real money is, anything that you get from organizational funds. So perhaps you have investment accounts that you just get interest money on, or you have any sort of, fee for service, or you charge for something that you do and you just get organizational funds that way. You probably do fundraisers, and so you get money through fundraisers that are usually unrestricted dollars. You could match, put them as part of a grant application to pay for part of the project and ask the funder for the other part. You might get donations from individuals or from, businesses or corporations. And then grants, with the exception of federal grants, you can match a grant to a grant. So you can go to one funder and ask for one piece of your project, go to another funder and ask for another piece of your project, and then kind of show together that you didn't ask either funder for 100% of your project, right? So you can match grant to grant. But getting those real dollars can also be kind of challenging. That's probably why we have so many people on the webinar today. And so different ways of looking at in-kind support. First is by tracking your volunteers and the number of hours that they serve your organization. And every year, this group called the Independent Sector, they calculate the value of a volunteer hour, and they give a total for like the US overall, and then they do it state by state because it's different state to state. And so the 2024 data just came out. And so you can see in West Virginia, the value is $29.13. And so if you're tracking the hours of your volunteers and you're actually getting, if it's sign-in sheets, if it's timesheets that you're doing with them, getting that information and collecting it, then you can show that you have support for your project. So, that you have 100 hours of volunteer hours that goes into your project. So you already have, 100 times 29.13. And that's support for your project that already exists, right? So you're asking them for a component, but not that in-kind support. Or any sort of discounts that you get if your rent is at a discounted rate, you can get a confirmation on that and then show that the rent is a match based on what fair market value is. Or if you get discounts on goods or services or anything. And then any other sort of donations that you might get, if you get product donations, you can put a value to that. If you get donations just of like clothing and things from the community, you can put a value to that. And again, that all shows that you have support coming from other places, and funders really want to see that. So getting this system set up as well, again, will make you more grant ready so that if that match is required, and even if it isn't required, you can show that you have support coming from other places. I'm just going to point these areas out that in order to apply for a federal grant, you have to have 2 registrations. One is with SAM, the System for Award Management, and the second is with grants.gov. So if you go to these different links, you'll be able to figure out how to make those registrations. The grants.gov is really simple. the SAM takes a longer time. So if you're thinking, I want to apply for a federal grant in 6 months, go ahead and get this process done now, because it does take some time. And then again, if you're also kind of looking to increase your capacity at the federal or state level, really looking at what requirements that you have to follow to manage that money. And so that's part of what's called the uniform, guidance that's out there. And you can look at the entire document right here and start to, again, that's where I said earlier, we got that CPA to help us set up what the differences were in how we can allocate dollars and how we can spend money and all that from federal versus our foundations. So again, if you're looking to increase your capacity that way. So I've got just a few more slides, and then we'll stop for some questions. But I have some different tips. The first is kind of finding a friend. I think it's always a great step in the process to find out if you're looking at a funder and you find out by looking at their list of awards who else that they've supported, calling them up, asking them about the process, who did they talk to, do they have any guidance? Can they provide you with any assistance? That sort of thing. And then again, this is changing rather rapidly. For federal, that it's a recommendation for federal and state grants to kind of find that friend in those agencies. Unfortunately, right now with the federal government, it doesn't even seem if you found that friend that they still work there or that they're allowed to talk. So that's changed a bit this year. But overall, it's still a good practice to find the people that can kind of help guide you through the process. The second one is reading successful proposals. This was always a really helpful thing for me when I was first writing grants, and even when I was a successful grant writer, reading really great grants helped me up my game, helped me see new ways to present information, new ways of using visuals that I really liked or something like that. And we have an award-winning grant proposal competition every other year. The next one's coming up here soon, but we have successful grant proposals on our website that you can go and look at and read. And they're from both government funders and from private funders. And then if you are looking to apply for federal grants in the future, you can also, through the Freedom of Information Act, request copies of successful proposals. So if there's a proposal that you anticipate is going to be coming out, at the end of 2025, you can go in now and request a successful copy of a proposal from that particular funding opportunity. Again, your project's going to be different from theirs, but it's great to kind of see the lay of the land, see how they presented information. It's about dissecting these things to find out what made it so strong, and then kind of emulating that when you're doing your own writing. Becoming a grant reviewer. This was something that I was very active in as a grant writer. And again, it helps me really just see what questions people asked when reading a proposal and those kinds of things. What was going on? What was the discussion? So you have local community foundations that are always looking for volunteer grant reviewers. Your local United Ways are always looking for volunteers. And then you can even do it at a government level of, state and federal agencies. So usually with those, you usually have to kind of demonstrate you have some sort of, expertise in a certain area. But those are also ways to just really learn the process from the inside. And then developing a grant team. Again, I think that especially when we're first starting, especially when we're small, and actually even after that, I think that people, you put a lot of pressure on grant writers. They kind of say, okay, it's all up to you. It's all on your shoulders, get out there and do it kind of thing. And it doesn't work that way. As grant writers and grant professionals, we're working with the staff involved in the programs. We're working with the participants that are being served in the program and you know, pulling information out of them that's going to help us write grants. We're working with more than you know, one. You know, just going into a room by ourselves doesn't really do this. So I really encourage you to, again, look at your stakeholders, talk to your stakeholders, see if there's people who are interested in doing, you know, research for you. So perhaps there's people who would love to be looking, sorry, looking at grants.gov or looking at GrantStation and finding those funders for you to apply to. Or perhaps there's people who really like to do data analysis and can help kind of take you know, a lot of information and make it into a nice needs section, or talk about what you've achieved, or somebody who really likes to do editing, right? So just, you know, bring other people into the process. You don't have to go at it alone. And having other people to kind of support you along the way will allow you to apply for more applications. And then I just kind of have this last little slide, and then we're going to wrap up. But let's do this. Let's find your uh, bar there and start hitting like the hearts or the whatevers, the thumbs up, when you find your kind of style. So are you a person who's like an action person? And an action person is, they just want to do the work. I want to spend a lot of time talking about it. I don't want to plan it. I don't want to worry about everybody's feelings. I just want to do the work, right? And that those are just kind of our action people, right? We have them right on this call here. I love to see it. And they're great. They get a lot of things done. They're really great people to be around, right? Then you have your people. So who are my people? My people are the people who are in the room. They're making sure every voice is heard. They're making sure that conflict is dealt with. They're making sure that, you know, one group or one person isn't dominating. See, we've got lots of people here too. Again, really important people to have around to make sure that everybody is contributing and getting their voices heard. Then we have meaning people, or like vision people. So who are my meaning people? They really can see the big picture, and they are delightful to hang around with. They get you all excited about what's going on, and they're really, you know, able to show you what the big picture is here. And so again, lovely people to be around. Okay. And then our last group here is our structure people. And so these are the people who like a timeline, they like a checklist, they like a workflow, and they can get all the boxes checked and everything done, but they don't want to horse around with all this other stuff. Right. So yeah, see, look, we got all of us on this thing. And so why am I, you know, even putting this on here? But the reason is just because as we're developing our teams, we do want to think about having people in each quadrant helping us develop our things. Because you can put a group of meaning people together and you are going to feel energized and invigorated, but the work's never going to get done. Because the structure people aren't there and the action people aren't there. And these folks are great at big picture stuff, just not working on the ground. You know, similarly, the structure people, you know, they get things done. They make sure that all the trains are running on time, and, you know, things are being taken care of. And again, very important to have around, but without having the meaning, or having the people who are kind of making sure that everybody's heard, you know, it can get a little stagnant. So anyway, I just think it's really important to not gravitate towards those potentially who are just like us, but looking and getting people from different areas to kind of help in our development overall, because you really kind of need the skills of all of those types of people. So with all of that, I am going to take a drink, and then I want to tell you about a free webinar that we have tomorrow, because we are on sale and our sale ends tomorrow. So you can get your GrantStation membership for $199. And if you want to come to our free webinar that Jeremy is doing with our researcher, Carrie, they'll show you everything that we have on the site and if that is a good investment for you. So with all of that, I'm going to take a drink and we'll see what kind of questions we have.
Excellent. I also learned today, and I often don't always learn everything in a webinar, but today I did. I'm into action structure, is what I'm into. So I'm like, that's my cross. I like knowing where I'm
Okay.
going, and I like to do the work. So
Yep.
it's not so much I want the big picture. It's like, what do you need done? Let's get it done. Let's get it done now. But I need to know
Yep.
how you want it done, not have like 30 things given to me and like figure it out. I'm like, well, no, what's the most important thing you want done? Because I'll do that
Yeah.
first. It's just
Yep.
interesting. So yeah.
It is.
Oh,
Good.
look at this. I'm going to read this. I usually don't read the comments. Barbara says, excellent information. Thank you so much, Alice. You're such a pro. Can you believe that?
Thank you. That
They
nice
obviously
of you.
don't know you. That's crazy. Okay, so let's get to some questions. There's some really good ones in here. Kathy asked this question, and there was a lot of talk about executive directors in the chat. Very interesting. So you'll also be getting a copy of the chat with your recording information, so don't worry about that. Kathy asks, how can a small nonprofit afford to hire an executive director? They haven't had one since 2016, which was when a grant that covered their time ended. Therefore, they serve as board president and do things that an executive director would normally do.
Yeah, and so that is, that can be challenging, because and it kind of depends on, if the executive director is working on programs, that is like engaged in the day-to-day activities of, what your organization does. A lot of times you can write them into the cost of a program grant, right? Showing that the executive director is, doing the work of this program. So you can put, components of their time into different grant applications. But then you might also find that, as board president, that you don't have the money for a staff or whatever. And so the board is actually what you'd call a working board, where they're making decisions and doing things, but guiding the organization, but they're also doing the work. So in that regard, there's not as much of a conflict in that regard because you're all collectively making those decisions. Um, and um, and then you just want to start to keep branching up and branching up to be able to afford, that executive director. And again, starting with program grants is the way I would go.
This next question is from Nawando, which is probably a very common question. How can a small nonprofit that's getting started hire a grant application writer? If it's frowned upon for grant writers to be paid by writing themselves and the grants they write, and there isn't any money yet, how do you hire and pay a grant writer? It's a very common question,
Right.
a good one too.
It is. It is. We get that question a lot. Yeah, and so what does happen is that people think that you can write the cost of a grant writer into your application, and you really cannot because the funder is only going to fund what happens from the time that they award your grant and then into the future. So they're not going to pay for past debts, or anything like that, the money that you've, accrued over time. So it is that challenging part, right? Like that how can you get the money if you don't have the grant writer and this and that. So just some different ways. I think that there's different ways that you can work with a grant professional to help you like outline all those things that was on the program slide where it had the need and the outcomes and the approach and all those kinds of things. Work with someone to create you that template. A professional to create that template for you that then maybe you can take, after they kind of create it for you, you can take and re-edit and rework, to apply for more grants and then, again, start to build your funding streams. But that was something that I did a lot, especially when I first started as a grant writer, to kind of get some track record. And then it was really great because I always really wanted to work with small organizations. And so that was one way to be like, I could still help you. And you didn't have to pay me beyond that initial putting that work together. It's your document, you take it, you work with it into the future.
I think the last one we can fit in here is from Kathy. Don't some funders accept a small nonprofit having a financial review versus an audit? It costs money too, but it's a lot less than an audit.
Yeah, so Kathy, that's a great question. So yeah, there's like kind of different levels. There's like a financial compilation, there's a financial review, and then there's an audit. I think those are the three steps. With the audit being the most expensive and the most provides the most information, but like the financial review, is less, costs you less and provides less assurances, but still. So yeah, funders have different like thresholds that they will take. And that's where again, I just would always check if there's a workaround for that audit. Just because that's the one part that I do find that sometimes there is, that I don't have this, will this work? But usually if you say I don't have a partner, then it's like, well, that's not going to work. But that's one thing that sometimes you can help with that workaround.
Visit GrantStation to see our latest online education offerings in the form of live webinars, interactive workshops, and on-demand learning. GrantStation.com.